whether physically or spiritually, in 2018 to give condolences to the Mandela family when Umamwini Nomzamo Madikizela Mandela passed away. And now we go back again to that house as we get news this morning of the passing of Zindzi Mandela. Chriselda Lewis is standing outside the house. Chriselda, what can you tell us this morning?
Well, that's right, Desiree, waking up to the sad news this morning that the daughter of former President Nelson Mandela and struggle stalwart Winnie Madikizela Mandela, that's Zindzi Mandela, is no more. She is understood to have passed away in the early hours of this morning. She was also, you'd recall, Desiree, South Africa's ambassador to Denmark, having been back home here in South Africa since the start of the lockdown. Already condolences continue to pour in. The Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Dr. Naledi Pandor, says she's learned with shock the news of the passing of South Africa's ambassador to Denmark, Zindzi Mandela. So the department just a couple of moments ago saying it's still busy gathering information regarding her passing and will be able to put out a detailed statement a little later on. And here at the home at this stage, still very quiet, I must say, Desiree, but the minister indicating that Zindzi will be remembered not only as the daughter of struggle heroes Tata Nelson Mandela and Mama Winnie Madikizela Mandela, but as a struggle heroine in her own right, in that she served South Africa well, according to that statement. Remember, Desiree, if you look back to 1985, when the then state president, P.W. Botha, had offered her father freedom, on condition that he unconditionally reject violence as a political weapon, it was said at the time. It was Zindzi who, while addressing the masses, read out her father's rejection letter to that. I recall watching something in the early hours of this morning where, Zindzi Mandela had basically said that her father said that he was accountable to the people. And, ironically, as we wake up this morning to the sad news, Desiree, it's on this day in July 1969 that the former President Nelson Mandela's eldest son, Madiba Tembekile Tembi, you would recall, died in a car accident. So while it's a time for memory for this family, it's also a very sad loss. The family, I understand, is asking for space at this time to try and digest what has taken place and, of course, map out the way forward. I do know that some family members will be travelling from other parts of the country to here in Johannesburg, where Zindzi Mandela has been since the lockdown itself started. But sad indeed here outside the home of the late struggle stalwart Mama Winnie Madikizela Mandela, where, of course, you recall those scenes, Thursday, that you referred to. Here this morning, a very somber mood. Only here behind me, one of the bodyguards of the late struggle stalwart Mama Winnie Madikizela Mandela is one of those people who are standing right here behind me, and I think they're really still in shock at this time about the sad news that we're all waking up to this morning about the passing of Zindzi Mandela, who very much embodied the struggle for freedom in this country, that she had, of course, grew up in a household of freedom fighters, and of course I think today, and in the many tributes, Desiree, that I think that you will get from many South Africans to those who loved with her, who worked with her, and as well who served with her in different aspects. Certainly you'll hear of someone who also stood her own or held her own in terms of fighting for the freedom of people in this country, and of course the embodiment of what her father and her mother had stood for. So a very somber moment, certainly here in South Africa, and I certainly think this is something that will reverberate around the world, given that she had been someone who was so close to her parents. I recall at the passing of her mother, Mamawini Madikizela Mandela, she always made sure that while the legacy of her father was something that was understood, respected and remembered around the world, she always made sure that her mother was never forgotten. That was the woman she always said was the one who held the torch when her father was incarcerated by the apartheid government, the woman who stood tall and made sure that the name of her late father remained and that the struggle for freedom was going to be attained. That is why we stand outside this house here this morning, because Zindzi Mandela certainly made sure that, the legacy of her mother is something that was never forgotten, standing alongside her father, the late former President Nelson Mandela. But a very somber mood here in Soweto this morning. None of the family members, I understand, Desiree, have arrived yet, but we're expecting sometime this afternoon some of the family members to travel from areas such as Cape Town. We're waiting for an official statement to come from the Mandela family. We understand that shouldn't be too long off at this particular moment. But most importantly, what they're asking for at this time is for some space for them to be able to communicate to South Africa and to the rest of the world the passing of Zindzi Mandela.
You said something earlier, and I just want to reiterate it, that was said in the statement of the Minister of International Relations, Minister Dr. Naledi Pandor, saying Zindzi will not only be remembered as a daughter of our struggle heroes, Tata Nelson and Mama Winnie Mandela, but as a struggle heroine in her own right. She served South Africa well. That's quite important, isn't it, Chriselda?
Absolutely, Desiree, and I have already made reference to that. I think when we look back at a very young Zindzi who was very brave to stand up in 1985, as I pointed out, when the then state president, P.W. Botha, had basically asked as a condition for release of the late former President Nelson Mandela, that he denounce unconditionally violence relating to political weaponization, if I may. It was Zindzi Mandela who was addressing the ordinary masses. And I recall in that statement where she said that my father wants to convey to you that he and his comrades at Pollsmoor prison are not accountable to you. And that was in reference to the then state president, P.W. Botha. So she was the one who delivered that message to loud cheers, I recall at the time, from some of those comrades who had been gathered there. So a woman of strength. She was never one to shy away from speaking her mind. I recall in quite the number of times that we had conversations with her in the run-up to the passing of her father, and also after the passing of her mother. She stood up.
All right, she's standing outside the Mandela home in Soweto. Chriselda Lewis will continue touching base with her.